In the early 1800s, America was still young, restless, and haunted by the mysteries of its frontier. The nation was expanding westward, but with that expansion came stories of strange spirits, old curses, and dark forces that seemed to lurk just beyond the campfire light. One of those stories became the most famous haunting in American history: the Bell Witch of Tennessee. Many of you have probably heard of the legend. A malevolent spirit that terrorized the Bell family with violent poltergeist activity, mysterious voices, and unexplained phenomena. But what fewer people know is that this legend intersects with one of the most powerful figures in American politics: Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States. Yes, the same Andrew Jackson who became known as Old Hickory, the hero of New Orleans, the fierce general, and the populist president who left a lasting and controversial mark on the country. The legend claims that Jackson not only encountered the Bell Witch himself, but that the spirit left a mark on him, a curse that would follow him all the way to the White House. In this story, we'll explore the history of the Bell Witch haunting, the strange involvement of Andrew Jackson, and the chilling suggestion that the most powerful man in America may have carried with him the shadow of something not of this world. Before we begin, if you enjoy these journeys into America's darkest legends and mysteries, make sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from mystery seekers all around the world. Because tonight's story is not just about a ghost. It's about power, politics, and a curse that refused to die. The story begins in Robertson County, Tennessee, in the year 1817. The Bell family was one of the most respected farming families in the region. John Bell, a hard-working farmer, had moved his wife, Lucy, and their children from North Carolina to settle on the fertile land of the Red River. For a time, life seemed idyllic. Their farm flourished, their reputation was strong, and by all accounts they were good, God-fearing people. But everything changed that autumn. It started with small disturbances. John Bell noticed strange animals on his property. Creatures unlike anything he had ever seen. A massive black dog with piercing eyes would appear at the edge of the woods and vanish into the shadows. A giant bird, larger than a turkey, sat ominously on the fence before flying off with an unnatural screech. The family began hearing knocking sounds on the walls of their log home at night, as if invisible hands were pounding to be let inside. At first, they dismissed these events as tricks of the imagination or the work of mischievous neighbors. But the disturbances grew worse. The children awoke to the sound of rats gnawing at their bedposts, only to find nothing there when they lit a lantern. Blankets were yanked off sleeping bodies by unseen forces. Whispers echoed through the dark halls, voices just out of reach, mocking, laughing, calling their names. And then the voices grew stronger. The entity seemed to fixate on the Bell's daughter, Betsy Bell. She was only a teenager when the attacks became violent. Something slapped her across the face in the darkness, leaving red welts on her skin. Her hair was pulled by invisible hands, yanking her to the ground. Neighbors who tried to help witnessed these assaults themselves. And many swore to the end of their days that they saw Betsy struck by forces no human eye could see. Eventually, the spirit found its voice. A disembodied presence began speaking aloud in the Bell household, first in faint whispers, then in full, mocking conversation. It quoted scripture. It sang hymns. It repeated sermons it had overheard word for word, as though it wanted to prove its intelligence. And yet, alongside this display of knowledge, it unleashed torrents of cruelty. It cursed, it mocked, it threatened. The Bells came to call this entity simply Kate. Some believed it was the spirit of a local woman named Kate Batts, who had once quarreled with John Bell over a land dispute. Others insisted it was something far older, far darker, not the ghost of a woman at all, but a demon wearing the mask of a voice. By the winter of 1817, the Bell Witch had become a full-fledged terror, not only for the Bell family, but for the entire community. Neighbors came to witness the phenomenon firsthand, and they left shaken, convinced they had heard and seen something that defied explanation. Word spread quickly, and soon the haunting of the Bell family was being spoken of across Tennessee. The attacks escalated. John Bell himself became the spirit's primary target. His throat swelled mysteriously, making it difficult to swallow. His tongue felt paralyzed during prayers. The entity hissed that it would kill him, and it did not seem like an idle threat. But the most chilling part of the Bell Witch haunting was not simply the violence. It was the intelligence. This was no mindless poltergeist. It conversed with visitors. It shared secrets about people's lives that it could not have possibly known. It traveled miles away in an instant, reporting on events before news could arrive by horseback. Witnesses would ask it questions privately, only for it to answer aloud in front of a crowd with uncanny accuracy. This was not just a haunting. This was a performance. A display of power designed to terrify and control. And it was during this time, as the legend of the Bell Witch spread, that one of the most unlikely visitors decided he had to see the phenomenon for himself. A man who would soon become one of the most powerful figures in American history, General Andrew Jackson. By the year 1819, the Bell Witch haunting was no longer a local curiosity. It was a national story whispered in taverns, printed in small-town gazettes, and retold by travelers who carried the legend further and further across the expanding United States. It was said that in Robertson County, Tennessee, there lived a spirit that could not be silenced, a voice in the dark that mocked ministers, assaulted children, and predicted tragedies before they occurred. It was intelligent, it was cruel, and most terrifying of all, it seemed to take pleasure in its notoriety. The story grew so famous that it eventually reached the ears of General Andrew Jackson. At this point in his life, Jackson was already a legendary figure. He had risen from poverty to become one of the fiercest military leaders in American history. His victory at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815 cemented his reputation as a national hero. The man who had humbled the British and ensured America's independence would never again be challenged. To his supporters, he was Old Hickory, unbreakable, indestructible, the very embodiment of American toughness. But Andrew Jackson was also a man deeply rooted in superstition. Like many of his generation, he lived in a world where folklore, faith, and the supernatural bled together. He had grown up hearing tales of witches, curses, and spirits that haunted the frontier. He was fascinated by such things, and when he heard of the Bell Witch, he reportedly declared, "By the Eternal, I must see this for myself." So Jackson gathered a small group of men, soldiers, friends, and aides, and set out for the Bell Farm in Robertson County. Their journey was said to have been filled with uneasy laughter, as the men mocked the very idea of a ghost that could slap children or argue with ministers. They were hardened veterans, men who had faced musket fire, bayonet charges, and cannon blasts. What, after all, could a witch possibly do to them? The answer came before they even reached the Bell home. As Jackson's wagon train approached the farm, the horses suddenly froze. They refused to move forward, no matter how hard the soldiers whipped or coaxed them. The wheels of the wagon seemed locked in place as though held by invisible chains. The men cursed, struggled, and sweated in the Tennessee sun, but the wagons would not budge. Frustration grew until Jackson himself, furious at the delay, reportedly shouted, "By the Eternal, it must be the witch!" And at that moment, a disembodied woman's voice rang out across the field. All right, General, you may proceed. I will see you tonight. The horses suddenly lurched forward on their own, the wagons rolling easily as if nothing had happened. The men fell silent. Their laughter died in their throats. They knew they had witnessed something unnatural. That evening, Jackson and his men were welcomed into the Bell home. They sat by the fire, drinking, talking, waiting for the spirit to reveal itself. Hours passed uneventfully, and some of the soldiers began to relax, whispering that perhaps the witch was nothing more than a clever hoax. But then it began. First, faint knocking on the walls, then scratching sounds across the wooden floor. The air in the cabin grew heavy, charged with a kind of electricity that made the hair on the back of the men's necks stand on end. Suddenly, one of Jackson's soldiers, a self-proclaimed witch-tamer who had bragged loudly on the way there that he could kill the spirit with a silver bullet, was seized by an unseen force. He screamed as his body was thrown across the room, struck repeatedly by invisible hands. His hair was yanked, his nose bloodied, his limbs twisted painfully until he begged for mercy. The disembodied voice of the witch rang out, mocking him. "Here's a taste of what a witch-tamer gets." The man stumbled to his feet, battered and humiliated, and fled the house. The others sat in stunned silence, unable to deny what they had seen. Jackson himself remained calm, but his face betrayed a flicker of unease. Here was a man who had faced death on the battlefield and never flinched. Yet in the presence of this unseen force, even Old Hickory seemed shaken. The voice returned, louder this time, addressing Jackson directly. "General, I know you. I know the blood you've spilled, the battles you fought. You will be president one day, but you will never escape me. I will be with you always." The soldiers gasped. How could the spirit know such a thing? At the time, Jackson had political ambitions, but the presidency was far from certain. Yet here was a prophecy, delivered in the mocking tones of a ghost, foretelling his future. The Bell family, terrified, begged the spirit to leave their guests in peace. But the witch only laughed. That night, Jackson's men reportedly begged him to abandon the visit and leave the farm immediately. And though Jackson protested, insisting he wanted to confront the entity further, his men were so terrified that by morning they packed their wagons and fled the property. Jackson would later tell friends that his encounter with the Bell Witch was one of the strangest experiences of his life. Though he rarely spoke of it publicly, those who knew him swore that he was never able to shake the memory. The prophecy of the witch, that she would be with him always, became a whispering shadow over the rest of his career. And, as history would prove, Andrew Jackson did indeed become President of the United States. But with his rise to power came controversy, bloodshed, and decisions that many claimed were cursed from the very beginning. Some even said the witch had kept her promise. After that night in Tennessee, Andrew Jackson's life moved forward. But the words of the Bell Witch never seemed to leave him. "You will be president one day, but you will never escape me." By the late 1820s, the prophecy had come true. Jackson, the fiery general of New Orleans, had become the 7th president of the United States. To the public, his rise seemed unstoppable, a triumph of grit and determination. But to those who remembered the Bell Witch's chilling words, his victory felt like the unfolding of something darker, as though his path had been guided by forces beyond politics. And indeed, Jackson's presidency would become one of the most controversial and turbulent in American history, haunted at every step by misfortune, bloodshed, and whispers of a curse. Almost immediately after Jackson took office in 1829, rumors began to circulate among staff in the White House. Servants whispered of strange footsteps in the halls at night, doors that opened and slammed shut on their own, and eerie, disembodied laughter echoing through the East Room. At first, these tales were dismissed as nerves or superstition. But the story spread. Jackson himself was said to have been awakened by the sound of a woman's voice mocking him in his sleep. He would storm through the halls, pistol in hand, swearing he would shoot any intruder. Yet no one was ever found. Some historians dismiss these accounts as folklore, but to others they suggest that the Bell Witch had indeed followed Jackson to Washington, just as she promised. Jackson's presidency was marked by decision after decision that brought suffering and unrest. His enemies claimed these were not the acts of a leader guided by reason, but of a man pushed by unseen forces. The Petticoat Affair. Early in his presidency, a scandal involving the wives of his cabinet members nearly tore his administration apart. Jackson defended the controversial Peggy Eaton with an obsession that baffled even his closest allies. He raged against her accusers with such fury that some whispered it was as though a spirit had provoked him, clouding his judgment and driving wedges between his supporters. The Bank War. Jackson's decision to destroy the Second Bank of the United States plunged the economy into chaos. His enemies called him reckless, a man possessed by stubbornness rather than reason. Newspapers of the time even referred to him as cursed, claiming he would drag the country into ruin with him. The Trail of Tears. Perhaps the darkest decision of Jackson's presidency was his enforcement of the Indian Removal Act, leading to the forced displacement of thousands of Native Americans. The suffering and death that followed were so immense that even Jackson's allies questioned whether he had doomed the nation with his choices. To his critics, it seemed like the Bell Witch's shadow had finally revealed its full weight, a curse not just on Jackson, but on the country itself. The curse did not stop at politics. Jackson's personal life was filled with tragedy. His beloved wife, Rachel Jackson, died suddenly of heart failure just weeks after his election. Jackson blamed the brutal campaign attacks against her character, but many whispered that it was the Bell Witch keeping her promise. After all, Rachel had been deeply religious and devoted, while Jackson's life was defined by violence and controversy. Some said the spirit had claimed her as the first price of Jackson's presidency. Jackson himself was plagued by lifelong health issues. He carried bullets in his body from duels and battles, suffered chronic pain, and experienced sudden fits of coughing that sometimes left him unable to speak. Though doctors attributed these to natural causes, the legend held that these were reminders, punishments from the witch that he could never escape. And then there were the dreams. Accounts from those close to him claim that Jackson sometimes awoke in terror, describing visions of a woman's laughter echoing through fire and smoke, of shadows that reached for him in the night. He never named the source of these dreams aloud, but to those who knew the Bell Witch story, the connection was clear. Some contemporaries went further. They whispered that Jackson's political power itself was proof of a bargain with the supernatural. How else, they asked, could a man from such humble beginnings rise to dominate the nation, surviving assassination attempts, duels, political scandals, and bitter enemies, always emerging stronger, always unbroken? One chilling story claims that during Jackson's presidency, he told a confidant late one night, "The witch said I would never be rid of her, and by God, she was right." Whether he truly believed in the curse, we may never know. But to those who watched him stride through Washington, with fury in his eyes and controversy at his heels, it seemed undeniable that something dark accompanied him wherever he went. The Bell Witch's prophecy had been fulfilled. Jackson became president. But the promise that she would never leave him seemed just as true. And as his presidency drew on, the shadow of the witch only grew darker. By the time Andrew Jackson left the White House in 1837, he was one of the most powerful and polarizing figures in American history. He returned to his Tennessee estate, the Hermitage, hailed as a hero by his supporters and despised as a tyrant by his enemies. But for all his victories, he was a man in decline, broken in body and, some whispered, tormented in spirit. Jackson had always carried scars, musket balls lodged in his chest and shoulder, chronic coughing fits that racked his body, headaches that left him sleepless. But in his final years, these ailments grew worse. Visitors to the Hermitage described the former president as gaunt, pale, and restless, often pacing the halls late into the night. Some said he seemed to be arguing with unseen voices, as though debating with a presence no one else could hear. The servants whispered that they sometimes heard a woman's laughter echoing through the empty rooms, or saw candles flicker violently whenever Jackson fell into one of his coughing spells. Horses on the property would shy at shadows no one could see, and hounds refused to enter certain parts of the house. Friends who visited him privately claimed that Jackson confessed to them strange experiences. He told one confidant that he often woke to the feeling of someone pulling at his hair, just as the Bell children had reported years earlier. Another visitor claimed Jackson admitted that in his dreams he saw the face of a mocking woman who told him again and again, "You will never escape me." Jackson laughed these stories off in public, dismissing them as nonsense. But those closest to him said the bravado was a mask, and that behind closed doors the man once called Old Hickory looked very much haunted. On June 8, 1845, Andrew Jackson died at the Hermitage at the age of 78. His death was attributed to chronic illness and heart failure. But as with so much of his life, rumors clung to his passing. Some claimed that in his final moments Jackson's face twisted into an expression of shock, as if he had seen someone or something standing at the foot of his bed. A few even insisted that his last words were not prayers or farewells, but a defiant cry, "By the Eternal, I will never surrender to you." No one knew exactly whom he was addressing, but to those who believed in the legend, the answer was obvious. He had spent his final breath in one last argument with the Bell Witch. After Jackson's death, the Bell Witch legend only grew stronger. In Tennessee, people swore that the witch had kept her promise. She had followed him from the Bell Farm to the White House and then into his grave. In Washington, political opponents whispered that his reckless decisions, his scandals, and the national suffering of his presidency were all the mark of her curse. Some even claimed that the witch had not just cursed Jackson, but the presidency itself. They pointed out the tragedies that followed many of his successors, as though the darkness that clung to him had seeped into the office he once held. At the Bell family farm, the haunting did not end with Jackson's visit. For years afterward, locals claimed the spirit still roamed the land, mocking, laughing, and reminding all who listened of the night she faced down a future president. Travelers avoided the property, and parents warned their children to stay far from the Red River woods. And as for Jackson himself, well, the stories say that on stormy nights, if you walked near the Hermitage or the old Bell property, you might still hear the echo of a man's booming voice, locked in eternal debate with a mocking woman's laughter. Old Hickory, it seems, is still arguing with the witch. Nearly 2 centuries have passed since the haunting of the Bell family and Andrew Jackson's fateful visit to their Tennessee farm. And yet, the story refuses to die. The tale of the Bell Witch has become America's most enduring ghost story, retold around campfires, classrooms, and in countless books and films. Tourists still travel to Adams, Tennessee, to stand near the cave where the witch is said to dwell, hoping to hear the whispers, the mocking laughter, or the footsteps of something unseen. And always, the name of Andrew Jackson lingers in the legend. The idea that one of America's most powerful presidents once faced, and was cursed by, a spirit on the frontier has become part of the haunting itself. To some, it is nothing more than folklore, a campfire tale inflated by generations of storytellers. To others, it is proof that even the strongest men cannot escape the shadows that walk beside us. Historians debate the facts. Did Jackson truly experience the witch, or was it an invention meant to add to his myth? Was the haunting a clever trick of neighbors or the fevered imagination of a frightened community? Or was it something else? Something that still lingers, waiting in the dark? Because strange things still happen. Visitors to the Bell Witch Cave report sudden chills, unseen hands pushing them back, or whispers calling their names. Some claim to see a tall, gaunt figure pacing the shadows, his voice booming, as if locked in an endless debate. Could it be Jackson himself, still bound to the witch, still arguing, still cursed? And so the legend endures. A president who could conquer armies but not escape a spirit's promise. A witch who mocked men and ministers alike, and who claimed her power would never end. The Bell Witch story asks us an unsettling question. What if our leaders, our heroes, are not just shaped by history, but haunted by something greater than history itself? What do you believe? Was Andrew Jackson truly cursed by the Bell Witch? Or was this just America's most famous ghost story stitched onto a president's life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey into the haunted crossroads of American history, don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this story with someone who loves the mysteries that refuse to fade. Because, in the end, legends like this remind us of a chilling truth. Power can make a man immortal in history, but it can also make him a target for the things that walk in the dark.